Welcome, I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. This week, an exchange of missiles fired by Israeli military and Palestinian militants have killed dozens of people, mostly Palestinians. Welcome, Robert.
Morning, Bruce.
It's an intractable and deadly dispute that's been dragging on for decades. What has triggered this event now?
First of all, we're in the last stages of Ramadan, and Jerusalem itself contains two of the holiest sites for both Judaism and Islam. And in the last week or so, in fact, Monday, Palestinian worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is one of the most holy sites in Islam, Israeli security forces suspected there were terrorists within the Al-Aqsa compound, and they used tear gas and rubber bullets, that's steel-capped rubber bullets, and stormed the compound. 180 Palestinians were quite seriously injured. 80 had to go to hospital. And this comes against a backdrop of the Israelis consolidating their control over East Jerusalem. And it should be recalled that the Israelis effectively annexed East Jerusalem in 1980, much to general international condemnation, with the exception of the United States. And we've seen, as you described in your opening remarks, the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip launching rockets into Israel. And 6 Israelis have been killed as a result of those rocket attacks. And then we've had Israeli retaliation, which has killed 53 Palestinians.
It seems like Israel and Palestine is one of those polarising topics that you're only allowed to take an either-or position on. But very few things are truly black and white. Can you help us get at some of the grey in this?
In power terms, in terms of military power, this is the supermarket versus the corner shop. Israelis have occupied the West Bank since 1967, since the 67 war, and they've also occupied East Jerusalem and effectively annexed it from 1980. And their control has been deepening over East Jerusalem. So both sides claim that's the Palestinians which want an independent state. They have not yet achieved statehood. They have limited self-rule under Israeli occupation in the West Bank. Palestinians are being displaced from their homes by Israeli settlers.
The United States has always seen itself as a significant player in what's going on here. What is it, and what are other members of the international community? What are they doing?
Well, the United States' position since 1967 was to support Resolution 242, which envisaged Israel returning the annexed territories. Israel did return the Sinai Peninsula, which it captured during the 1967 war, and it has also effectively returned the Gaza Strip. It's disengaged from the Gaza Strip. But it has retained East Jerusalem and the West Bank, as well as the Golan Heights. And the thing that's causing, I suppose, strong reaction is the fact that there seems to be unilateral actions by Israel with respect to East Jerusalem and also the West Bank, and in violation, as many people see it, of international law, as represented by Resolution 242 in 1967. The Americans have traditionally taken the view there's a two-state solution. Mr. Trump seemed to backtrack on that, which may have emboldened the right-wing Netanyahu government. The Biden administration has reaffirmed its support for a two-state solution. But it does, America's always seen itself as an important player in the Middle East, but one which was committed to one side, which is Israel. So it can never really be a genuine mediator. There are increasingly in this crisis, for the first time recently, I've seen that some of the major media networks in the US are beginning to cover the Palestinian side and the case that they make.
What role has New Zealand taken in this?
A pretty modest one so far. But we also, as a small country, relatively small, not as small as some people believe, have a huge stake in the maintenance of international law. And so if we advocate, and all New Zealand governments have done this, argued for the maintenance of international law, an international rules-based system, we can't necessarily just call for both sides to calm down and de-escalate. We also have to call for the support of international law. And there is a clear case in this dispute where one side seems to be taking a pretty cavalier attitude to international law and does not seem to be adhering to the terms of Resolution 242.
That resolution that you've mentioned a couple of times, it was a resolution by the UN after the 1967 war.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes.
Did Israel sign up to that?
It was the resolution that brought the Six-Day War to an end. And I think it's fair to say that there have been differences between various Israeli governments. And there was great hopes in the early 90s, for example, that there could be a two-state solution. But it's fair to say that Israeli politics has moved on balance towards the right in the last 2 decades. And I'm not trying to say that there's not fault on the Palestinian side either. I mean, for example, this reaction by Hamas in the Gaza Strip is not helping the situation. It's only reinforcing the hardliners in the Israeli government and giving them the opportunity to really crack down. And it's irresponsible to launch hundreds of rockets which would hit Israeli civilians.
What do you see that would need to fundamentally change to bring a lasting solution?
I think, quite frankly, and Bernie Sanders, who's a Jewish US senator, has said this repeatedly, the United States needs to put more pressure on Israel to relinquish its control over the West Bank and at least reach a negotiated solution. The original idea was a two-state solution with the division between the Palestinians and the Israelis over control over Jerusalem. What happened during Mr. Trump's period in office was that Mr. Trump recognized that Jerusalem, the whole of Jerusalem, was the capital of Israel. And much of the international community didn't agree with that because it seemed to be in violation of the way in which the 1967 war ended.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Te pono me te araha.